Asante sana DJ. Asante sana mheshimiwa mgeni rasmi kwa speech yako nzuri. Hakika imesheheni mambo mengi na ushauri kwa kila mtu. Tunashukuru sana kwa hotuba yako nzuri. Sasa kwa mujibu wa ratiba, kwa sababu muda umekwenda, kinachofuata ni wasilisho. Kutakuwa na presentations kadhaa, zipo 3. Lakini kabla hizo presentations zitakuwa moderated na mtu mwingine. Wala sisi wawili tumezoeleka sana hapa mbele. Kwa hiyo dada Christina ata moderate session inayofuata ya watu ambao wana presentation wako watu 3. Lakini kabla ya kufanya moderation ataongea kidogo kuhusiana na wajibu wa wanawake katika kukuza na kulinda haki za binadamu nchini. Yes. Naomba staff moja nishtulie dada Christina, naona ametoka. Yes. Lakini ningeomba meza kuu niwainue kwa sababu session inayofuata ni ya watu wanafanya presentation. Tukae huku ili wanaofanya presentation wakae hapa mbele kwa ajili ya presentation ambao wanakuwa naifanya. Basi meza kuu wakiwa wanakaa, wimbo uendelee DJ. Naomba washushe meza kuu. Ninaomba presenters wafuatao wapite mbele kwa ajili ya presentation. Dr. Veronica Buchumi pamoja na moderator, naomba ujiongee kwenye podium. Utatoa remarks, then after remarks kwa kifupi sana unaendelea na moderation. Yes, wale ambao wana present Dr. Veronica Buchumi, naomba kumuita Nairo Mbwambo. Nairo. Naomba kumuita Joseph Godfrey Senyenge. Godfrey Senyenge. Yes. Karibuni sana.
Binadamu, walimu, cha Dar es Salaam, walimu watetezi wa haki za binadamu. Binadamu wajibu wetu mimi na wewe, kulinda haki za binadamu. Jukumu letu mimi na wewe, kulinda haki za binadamu.
Asante sana DJ. Basi bila kupoteza muda naomba nimkaribishe dada Christina. Yeye pia ni mkurugenzi wa Tanzania Network of Legal Aid Providers. Karibu sana dada Christina kwa ajili ya remarks na kwa ajili ya moderation ya session hii.
Asante sana. Habarini za mchana. Habarini za mchana. Nashukuru sana kwa fursa hii, lakini pia nipende kutambua hotuba nzuri sana iliyotolewa na Mheshimiwa Joseph Butiku, na kwa sababu mimi nazungumza juu ya haki za wanawake, niseme kwamba haki za binadamu ni haki pia za wanawake, na wanawake ni watu. Na kama ulivyotuambia kwamba haki za binadamu ni maendeleo na maendeleo ni watu. Tanzania zaidi ya 51% ni wanawake. Kwa hiyo watu hao ni wanawake na ndio wanaleta maendeleo nchini Tanzania. Nimeomba kuzungumza juu ya jukumu la wanawake katika kukuza na kulinda haki za binadamu. Niseme tu kwamba wanawake nchini Tanzania wamekuwa na jukumu kubwa sana katika kukuza na kulinda haki za binadamu, na hili limetekelezwa kwa njia mbalimbali. Ukianzia tangu tumepata uhuru na kabla ya kupata uhuru, mama yetu Bibi Titi alikuwa ni miongoni mwa wanawake ambao walipigania sana uhuru na Tanzania ikaweza kupata uhuru pamoja na wakina mama wengine. Na njia mbalimbali ambazo wanawake tumekuwa tukizitumia katika kukuza na kulinda haki za binadamu, mojawapo imekuwa ni utetezi na uhamasishaji, lakini pia ushawishi wa maboresho na utungwaji wa sheria mbalimbali, lakini pia kuridhia mikataba mbalimbali ya kikanda na ya kimataifa. Kwa hiyo katika utetezi na uhamasishaji, wanawake wameweza kuongeza uelewa kuhusu masuala ya haki za binadamu. Hapa tunamuona mama yetu, mama yangu na ambaye pia ni mwenyekiti wa taasisi ambayo naiongoza, Dr. Helen Kijo Bisimba, ambao wamekuwa mstari wa mbele katika kutetea haki za binadamu. Lakini kuna mama yetu, Mama Mary Lusimbi na wakina mama wengine wengi sana, na mama yetu Mama Mongela na Beijing platform wamefanya kazi kubwa mpaka kufikia hapa ambapo wametupa sasa vijiti sisi kina mama tunaendeleza jukumu hilo la utetezi na uhamasishaji. Kwa hiyo katika kupigania marekebisho na utungwaji wa sheria mbalimbali hapa nchini Tanzania, kuna sheria mbalimbali ambazo wanawake wamehakikisha zinatungwa: sheria ya ndoa, sheria ya ardhi, sheria ya elimu, sheria ya utoaji wa huduma za msaada wa kisheria, sheria ambayo imeweka masharti maalum ya makosa ya kujamiiana ambayo sasa iko katika kanuni za makosa ya jinai, sheria ya mtoto, sheria ya ardhi na ukiukwaji wa haki za binadamu kwa ujumla wake. Kwa hiyo tumefanya kazi kubwa sana kwa kutumia utaalamu wetu, weredi wetu, kutoa maoni na kushirikiana na serikali kuhakikisha sheria zinatungwa. Na hata sasa tunaendelea kufanya ushawishi wa marekebisho ya sheria ya ndoa na sheria nyingine kama sheria zinazokandamiza mwanamke, hasa sheria za kimila lakini pia kutungwa kwa sheria mahususi kwa ajili ya kupinga ukatili wa kijinsia nchini Tanzania, ambapo wengi mnaona kabisa maadili ambayo mengi yake makosa ni makosa ya ukatili wa kijinsia yameshamili katika nchi yetu. Lakini wanawake pia wamekuwa mstari wa mbele katika kuhakikisha upatikanaji wa haki kwa kuanzisha taasisi mbalimbali ambazo zinatetea mwanamke na wananchi kufikia haki zao. Kama nilivyosema, sheria msaada wa kisheria, kuna taasisi mbalimbali kama Taula, WIDAF, WILAC ambao wamekuwa mstari wa mbele katika kutoa huduma za msaada wa kisheria na kuhakikisha wanawake wanaifikia haki, lakini pia na wanapata haki zao kwa wakati na kuzielewa na kuzifahamu. Lakini pia nilizungumza swala la sheria ya elimu. Taasisi kama Msichana Initiative na taasisi nyingine zimekuwa mstari wa mbele kuhakikisha kwamba hata yule mtoto ambaye amepata ujauzito anarejea shuleni na kuendelea na masomo yake, na tumewaona wanafunzi watoto wakirejea na kufanya mitihani yao na kufaulu licha ya kwamba walipata ujauzito. Kwa hiyo wamehakikisha kwamba mtoto wa kike anapata elimu na hivyo kuja kusaidia nchi yetu. Lakini wanawake wamekuwa katika mstari wa mbele kuwawezesha wanawake kuweza kumiliki ardhi. Kwa hiyo kuwawezesha kufikia haki zao za kiuchumi, kijamii, kisiasa. Mafunzo mbalimbali yametolewa kwa wanawake wanasiasa ambao wanagombea nafasi mbalimbali, kuanzia nafasi za uongozi katika serikali za mitaa na hata bunge, lakini kuweza kushika nafasi mbalimbali za kiserikali. Na wanawake wengi tunaona, tuna mawaziri, tuna wakuu wa mikoa, wakuu wa wilaya na wakurugenzi ambao ni wanawake ambao wamewezeshwa ili kuweza kushika nyadhifa mbalimbali. Lakini pia tuna taasisi mbalimbali kama Equality for Growth ambao wanawawezesha wanawake masokoni, ambapo wanaweza kuwasaidia wanawake kuweza kujisimamia kiuchumi na kuendesha biashara na kujiletea maendeleo wanawake wenyewe mmoja mmoja, na pia kusaidia taifa letu. Kwa hiyo tumetoa elimu katika jamii, tunaendelea kutoa elimu katika jamii na hivyo kuifanya jamii kuweza kuelewa wajibu wao, kusimamia haki zao na kujitetea pale wanapokuwa wana changamoto na uvunjifu wa haki zao na hasa haki za kibinadamu. Kwa sababu ya muda mfupi nimeongea kwa ujumla, na pia nimeombwa kuwezesha mjadala ambao unafuatia, na mjadala wenyewe nitaenda kuwakaribisha wazungumzaji ambao wapo, mtaenda kuwasikiliza, na ni mjadala ambao tunaenda kuangalia haki za makundi maalum walio katika mazingira hatarishi na haki za wale watu wachache, ambapo watazungumzia matarajio, changamoto, nafasi ya watetezi wa haki za binadamu na watendaji wengine. Na nitaomba nianze kumkaribisha Dr. Veronica Buchumi ambaye atakuja kuzungumza maendeleo ya mahakama za watoto katika kukuza kulinda haki za watoto nchini. Karibu sana mhadhiri wetu wa chuo kikuu hiki cha Dar es Salaam. Karibu sana, na utatumia naomba kufahamu muda wetu ili niweze kujua waongeaji watatumia muda gani.
Ni dakika 10 kwa mujibu wa ratiba.
Sote dakika 10.
Dakika Manake nusu saa utatumia.
Sawa, asante. Karibu, nakupa dakika 3.
Lakini akiongea kwa ufupi
Kama
zaidi.
dakika 10 sasa tuko 4. 10 kwa kila mmoja ama kwa wazungumzaji wote?
10 kwa kila mmoja.
Okay, sawa.
Yes.
Karibu. Karibu Dr.
Habari za mchana. Niwalete kwenye haki za watoto kidogo. Mheshimiwa mgeni rasmi ameongelea kuhusu watoto kidogo, akaongelea kuhusu watoto wa mtaani, akauliza kwamba je, mtaa unazaa? Hauzai. Kwa hiyo mchana wa leo naomba nitaongea kwa Kiingereza. Topic yangu inahusu a reflection on the evolution, trends and development of juvenile courts in promoting and protecting children's rights in Tanzania. Now, I'll do a brief background on children's rights, and then I'll a bit discuss the relevance or rationale of juvenile courts, like why do we need juvenile courts in addition to the already existing courts. Baada ya hapo nitaangalia the development and changes of juvenile courts in Tanzania, and then the implications of the changing legal framework as far as the establishment of juvenile courts are concerned in Tanzania. Now, a bit of the background. I won't go back to the independence period. Before 2009, children's rights, or the legal framework governing children's rights, was scattered like in different legislations. There was the Children and Young Persons Act that dealt with children in conflict with the law, those who committed crimes. And then we had the Affiliation Act, which aimed at protecting those children who were born by parents who were not wedded. And then there was the Adoption Act to facilitate adoption of children. So you can see that there were different laws. Then in 2009, that was the turning point where the government enacted, or the parliament enacted, the Law of the Child Act, which now is the cornerstone of children's rights in Tanzania. And this act domesticates various regional and international instruments on children's rights. It also consolidated various laws, as I have mentioned. So it brought together all aspects of children under one law, unlike previous. And then the law also clearly clarifies the institutional framework for the promotion and protection of human rights. So if you look at the Law of the Child Act, we see the Department of Social Welfare charged with protection and promotion of human rights, of children's rights, and then we have courts, which now the Act establishes specifically the establishment of the Law of the Child, the juvenile court, and then we also have police officers. Now, as I said, the next point after that brief background would be, why do we need juvenile courts? Because we have normal courts, but if you look at the legal framework, at the international level, at the regional level, there is an emphasis of having juvenile courts to specifically address issues relating to children. So if you look at paragraph 2.3 of the guidelines for action of the Beijing rules, which now establishes the minimum standards for handling children, it says specialized institutions like juvenile courts are important to meet the varying needs of children. We all agree that children are not like us. Their ability to think, their ability to act or to decide on various issues facing them is not like the one that adults have. So for that matter, in order for children to enjoy their rights when they are facing courts of law, they need a court that can understand them. They need a court that has child-friendly environment that can accommodate their immaturity, that can accommodate their incapacity or incapability to decide to act rationally and for such reasons. But also juvenile courts are there to meet the needs of the society. So that's why that international community, but even our law, has provisions to emphasize the need to establish juvenile courts. And juvenile courts play different roles, that sometimes children commit crimes, and you cannot want to subject them to the normal adversarial system that maybe other criminals go through. So the courts, they have a central role to ensure that at all times when children come to court, whether they are because they're in conflict with the law or they're just simply in contact with the law, they have a place where they can be free, they can be heard, they can access justice that meets their own needs. And now, the jurisdiction of juvenile courts, if we look at the development, previously, under the Children and Young Persons Act, the juvenile court that was established had jurisdiction to deal with only criminal cases that were committed by children. But after 2009, or after the enactment of the Law of the Child Act, now we can see the move from a court that only deals with issues of criminal matter, but also to deal with civil jurisdiction. So today, we have a juvenile court in Tanzania, or we have juvenile courts in Tanzania that have jurisdiction to entertain cases, or to entertain criminal cases committed by juveniles or by children, but also it determines cases of civil nature. For instance, the court has the capacity to issue care orders that sometimes children cannot remain in the care of their parents, and we need a court order that we remove them from their families. So the court, the juvenile court, can issue care orders. They can issue exclusion orders that sometimes some people don't need to be close to children, and they can be prohibited from being into contact with such a child. But they also entertain cases concerning maintenance and custody. Now, maybe after that, I talk a bit about the development, which I have briefly already explained. So before 2009, we had the juvenile court was established under the Children and Young Persons Act, and under that law, and issued a circular where over 100 primary courts premises were declared or were designated as primary courts. And this circular of 2016 was revoked by another circular that was issued in 2019, which also designated over 150 primary courts to be used as what? To be used as juvenile courts. So the premises of primary court being used as juvenile courts, but they were supposed to be presided over by a resident magistrate of a respective district. Now, come 2020, the Parliament passed the Written Laws Miscellaneous Amendment Act and amended Section 98 of the Law of the Child Act. And under this law, the powers of the CJ, of the Chief Justice, to designate primary courts as premises of primary court as juvenile courts were taken away. The powers were taken away. And the amendment designated or said the district courts and courts of resident magistrate will be having powers to try cases that would be triable by a juvenile court. So as we speak today, the law provides for the establishment of juvenile courts, but at the same time, the district courts and courts of a resident magistrate are given powers to try cases involving children. So what I want us to reflect on is the implication of this change of the legal framework governing juvenile courts in Tanzania. Now that today, technically, all resident courts, or all courts of resident magistrates, all district courts are juvenile courts because they have powers to determine all cases involving juveniles or all cases that emanate from the Law of the Child Act. That's what I want us to reflect on. And maybe before I go into that, why did these changes come? I had an opportunity to read the standard operating procedures that were issued by the Judiciary of Tanzania to guide magistrates in managing children cases. And there was a place where they say the change that was brought by the amendments in 2020 was because the premises of the primary court, the infrastructure that the primary court premises had, were not friendly enough for children. So that was one reason as to why the law was changed the way it is today. And then if you look at the bill that led to the enactment of the Written Laws Miscellaneous Amendment Act, there is a section where they say the purpose of the bill. And I'll just quote. They say the act is amended, the Law of the Child Act, to confer jurisdiction to all district courts and courts of resident magistrate to handle juvenile cases. The proposed amendments also place the juvenile courts under the management and supervision of the DC and RM's resident magistrate court in their respective district and region. That was the objective of amending the Law of the Child. So if you look at what is stating there, it doesn't really say why was it necessary to confer jurisdiction to district courts and resident magistrates to determine cases involving juveniles. Now, the implications. There could be the plus side of it and the minus side of it. The plus side would be, the plus side of it would be that we now have many courts. There won't be backlogs. There won't be cases piling up in juvenile courts, like in the few juvenile courts that we have, because technically, all district courts are now listening or are now hearing cases involving juveniles. All resident court magistrates, all courts of a resident magistrate, they all determine cases. So cases would be determined fast. That's the advantage. But the minus side, if you look at the international and regional frameworks, we say we need specialized institutions, and if not specialized institutions, the ones that exist should at least try to provide the environment that is needed for children. So the minus of allowing everybody, like all the district courts, all the courts of a resident magistrate to determine cases involving juveniles is that they remove this element of specialization. Because if you look, for instance, the law of the child, there are very few universities that teach law of the child. So most of the people presiding over these district courts, some of them or majority of them won't have a clear understanding of the principles and standards that are needed to protect children. And it's because of time I could have shared with you a few examples of scenarios that sometimes even if you go to the juvenile court, there are times where you find things and you ask yourself like, wow, is this how the juvenile court should operate? Because in the first place, we expect that a juvenile court should be a place where formalities are not so strictly adhered to. But you would be surprised that sometimes a case is struck out simply because a court moved from one building to another, and then there are issues in the name, and then the case is struck out. So then you ask yourself, what will happen now that every district court, every court of a resident magistrate have jurisdiction? So there is this element that if there are no efforts done to train those who are presiding over the district courts and courts of resident magistrate, there might be scenarios where children will be losing their rights to be heard. They will be losing their right to access justice. And then it also waters down the rationale for the establishment of juvenile courts. That's the minus side. Now, the lingering questions with the changing legal framework when it comes to protection of children's rights through courts of law. Maybe we need to ask ourselves, because as I said, the law was changed because the primary court premises were not friendly enough. The infrastructures were not good enough for children. But what are the chances that the 2020 amendments of the Law of the Child Act will solve or have solved the identified mischief? The challenges of infrastructure, accessibility, and operationalization that arose in the designated primary courts. And maybe the other thing that I was asking myself, maybe out of ignorance, so what happens to the primary courts that were designated by the CJ before the changes, before the amendment, because the law is silent? Do they continue to preside over cases, for instance, that they were handling before 2020, or do they stop immediately? And then another question is, what about the resource scarcity to establish premises that are child-friendly and are aware of the varying needs of children coming to these courts? Because I believe if you go out, like throughout Tanzania, not all district courts, not all courts of resident magistrates will be having the environment that we dream of or we wish to see, to meet the varying needs of children. And then I wondered, would it be possible maybe to have specific district courts or courts of a resident magistrates designated specifically to deal with juvenile cases? So maybe not all district courts, not all courts of resident magistrates, but just specifically designated. So maybe you say in the region of Dar es Salaam we have maybe 2 district courts. So at least those ones are easy to ensure that whoever that is in that court understands the basic principles and standards that are needed to handle cases involving children. So those are the questions that I was trying to ask myself. To conclude, establishment of juvenile courts seems to be a work in progress in Tanzania. We are still watching our steps. Do we need specific institutions, or do we just need the ones that we already have, no more? Because with this change, I don't think if there will be, the chances that specific juvenile courts will be established is very low. And then we also need to reflect on the rationale and relevance of juvenile courts and assess the outcome of the changing legal framework on handling children cases. And maybe this can help us to determine what we need to do as a country to enhance the protection of children's rights through courts of law. If we continue as the law stands now, deliberate, rapid, and intensive training of resident magistrates on essential principles and standards of handling cases involving children is inevitable in order for us to achieve the full protection of the rights of those children coming into contact with the law and eventually before courts of law. Thank you.
Asante sana Dr. Veronica Buchumi, mhazili katika chuo kikuu hiki cha Dar es Salaam. Tunakushukuru kwa kutoa mwongozo na kutupa maswali ambayo sisi kama watetezi wa haki za binadamu na haki za watoto tunapaswa kuendelea kuyafanya, hasa changamoto za sheria yenyewe na uendeshwaji wa mahakama za watoto. Ametoa pia maswali ambayo yalikuwa kama mapendekezo ya nini kifanyike. Tutarudi baada ya wazungumzaji wote kuzungumza, tutauliza maswali na watapata nafasi ya kujibu maswali, lakini pia nitakaribisha ili hadhara iweze kuchangia katika mjadala huu. Sasa nichukue fursa hii kumkaribisha mhazili msaidizi ndugu Nailo Mbwambo, ambaye ni mhazili msaidizi katika chuo cha Katoliki Mbeya. Karibu sana, naye atazungumza juu ya haki za binadamu nchini Tanzania katika maeneo ya viwanda vya uziduaji, na ataangalia ufanisi wa sheria juu ya kazi, afya na usalama wa wafanyakazi. Karibu sana.
My title is on the, nitaangalia kwenye upande wa Human Rights in Tanzania Extractive Industries, exploring the effectiveness of the law on occupational health and safety of workers. Extractive industries zina involve katika masuala yote ya extraction of raw materials katika ardhi, inaweza ikawa ni gas, madini, au gold na different kind of minerals. Lakini the whole process ambazo zinafanyika katika upande wa extractive industries, there are 3 main stages ambazo kuna exploration, pia kuna the process of production, na the process of decommissioning. But all of these processes ambazo zina involve katika upande wa extraction of minerals au extraction of raw materials from the earth, zinapelekea au zinaleta negative impact to the society au negative impact within the extractive industries ambayo inaishia kwenye affect the health or occupational health and safety of workers within the extractive industries. Ambao tumeangalia hizo 3 stages, the exploration, production and decommissioning. Kwa upande wa kwanza, kwenye upande wa the first stage ya exploration, this is the first stage ambayo ina involve the investors au the miners, to both large scale miners, middle scale miners and small scale miners, kuweza kufanya utafiti wa kuweza kugundua ni aina gani ya madini ambayo yapo katika eneo fulani. Kwa hiyo zile process ambayo inafanyika wana involve different processes which involve the drilling process and trenching. But hiyo process the process of exploration inapelekea kuweza kuwepo kwa landslide, pia inaleta dust, pia ina affect sometimes inaweza katokea hata accident within the process ambayo inapelekea kuweza kuaffect the healthy and safety of workers within the extractive industries. Ningetamani pia kuonyesha hiyo machine niliweka ana control slide. Number in the next, yeah. No, rudi back. As you can see, ile ni mojawapo ya mashine ambayo inaitwa ni drilling machine ambayo inahusika kwenye kuchimba udongo. Wanatoa udongo, either wanaweza kupata rocks au wanaweza kuchukua udongo na kuweza kupeleka laboratory. One among the process ambayo inaweza kufanyika hapo ni metallurgical test, kuweza kujua aina ya madini ambayo yako hapo na njia gani ya kuweza kutumia kufanya, na either the investor aweza kuproceed with the process of the exploration of the kuweza kuproceed with the process of your production au la. But that machine is very heavy, ni kubwa sana, ambayo inaleta vumbi, ambayo inaleta a lot of negative impact ambayo inapelekea kuweza kuaffect the existence of workers within the extractive industries. And the other one is the stage of production. This is when the investors or the miners wanaweza kuanza kuchimba madini, ambayo hiyo process inapelekea kuwepo na wanafanya drilling, sometimes wanatumia baruti kuweza kupasua miamba ambayo inaweza kuleta noise, hata pia wafanyakazi kuweza kuwa affected with that noise, kuharibu masikio. Wengine pia at the same time katika this process wanatumia a lot of chemicals, kwa mfano cyanide na mercury, ambao mercury ni mbaya zaidi, ikimchoma tu mtu inaweza katoboa kabisa hata mifupa yake. Kwa hiyo kuna uhitaji mkubwa sana kuweza kuangalia check the occupational health and safety of workers within the extractive industries due to their process ambayo iko very sensitive, na ni muhimu sana kuweza check all the stages within the extractive industries to protect and promote the occupational health and safety of workers within the extractive industries. And the last one is the decommissioning. Decommissioning, after the whole process of exploration and the production of the raw materials within the extractive industries, this is when the miners wanaweza kufunga ile migodi au plant. Lakini kama the process ambayo imefanyika kuweza kufanya decommissioning haiko effective kama inavyotakiwa kwa utaratibu wake, basi inaweza kuleta madhara pia hata kwa wananchi. Kwa mfano mwaka 2022 kuna mgodi mmoja upo Singida unaitwa Wilson, uliweza kuanguka. Uliweza kuleta athari kubwa sana kwa wanakijiji, maana ni kama vile magofu yalikuwa yamebaki. Kwa hiyo at the end of the day the environment inakuwa affected. Okay, wanasema kwamba wanafanya decommissioning, sawa, wanafunga migodi, sawa, lakini at the end of the day ni ngumu sana kuweza kurudisha ile ardhi ambayo imetumika kwa ajili ya uchimbaji kuweza kurudi katika hali yake kama ya mwanzoni. Haswa inakuwa na madhara makubwa sana, haswa kwa upande wa large scale miners. Yeah. Kienda kwenye other slide. Okay. Kutokana na effect ambayo inakuwa brought by the extractive industries, the international organization hawakuweza pia kukaa kimya. Kwa mfano, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights iliweza kuja na different kind of rights kuweza protect the rights of workers within the extractive industries or in different kind of sector. Japokuwa the Universal Declaration of Human Rights haikuweza kuprotect au kuja na hizo principles au rights ambazo ziliweza kuprotect the workers directly. Hapana, bali wao walikuja na rights ambazo ni fundamental rights, ile hali tu ya sisi kuweza kuwa wanadamu, basi kuna haki za msingi ambazo ziliwekwa pia at the same time the same fundamental rights zinaweza kuprotect the workers who are working within the extractive industries. And not only that, the International Labour Organization pia haikuweza kuwa kimya, ilikuja with different kind of principles and other convention within the waliweza kuja na different kind of convention ambazo ziliweza kuprotect the workers who are working in different kind of sectors, not only in extractive industries, but pia walikuja na convention kuweza kuprotect the workers katika upande wa agriculture, katika masuala ya madini, katika masuala ya mafuta, katika masuala ya gesi, ambayo mojawapo ya hizo convention ambazo zimeweka na International Labour Organization ikiwemo the Occupational Safety and Healthy Convention of 1981, the Safety and Health in Mines Convention number 176, as well as Working Environment into brackets air pollution, noise and vibration convention number 148. But tukija pia katika upande wa kihistoria Tanzania, before the independence hatujawahi kuwa na sheria yote ambayo inahusika na masuala ya the occupational health and safety of workers, bali kulikuwa na utawala wa wakoloni ambao tulikuwa tunafanya the process of extraction of minerals or extraction of raw materials very locally, ambayo at the end of the day tulikuwa na sheria moja inaitwa the Factories Ordinance, but this law haikuweza kuprotect directly workers from the extractive industries, but ilijaribu kulinda haki za binadamu kwa upande wa wafanyakazi wote kwa ujumla ambazo wanafanya kazi katika factories. So kutokana na mapungufu hayo ya sheria hiyo ya Factory Ordinance, basi kukatengenezwa sheria nyingine, sheria ya the Mining Act of 1998, it was enacted. Japokuwa nayo ilikuwa na mapungufu yake, ilishindwa ku protect the workers who are working in mining areas kwenye upande wa occupational health and safety of workers. Then after independence, then in 2003 ndipo tuliweza kupata sheria ya the Occupational Health and Safety of Workers of 2003. Japo napo hii sheria ina mapungufu yake na kumekuwa na malalamiko makubwa sana kwa wachimbaji, hasa wachimbaji wadogo na wachimbaji wa middle scale mines, kwamba wamekuwa kilalamika wakisema kwamba sheria zipo kwa ajili ya kulinda wafanyakazi, lakini at the end of the day kwa mfano kuna section inasema kwamba wafanyakazi kabla ya kuanza kazi basi kuna uhitaji wa wafanyakazi hao kuweza kupimwa afya, ambayo all the cost ambazo zinafanyika au zinatakuwa kuwa paid katika upande wa OSHA, basi mwajiri anatakuwa afanye hivyo. Inakuwa ni changamoto kubwa sana kwa upande wa middle scale miners and small scale miners kuweza kuproceed with that process. At the end of the day unakuta wafanyakazi wanaendelea kufanya kazi wakiwa na afya ambayo sio salama, au wengine wanakuwa wanaenda wanafanya kazi, at the end of the day wanakuwa wanapata madhara, lakini wanashindwa kuweza kupata huduma ndani ya upande wa institution ambao wanahusika na masuala ya occupational health and safety of workers. Kwa hiyo kutokana na mapungufu hayo pia kuna tatizo la implementation challenges of occupational health and safety of workers in Tanzania extractive industries, na hiyo ni kutokana na inadequate coverage. Kwa upande wa Tanzania occupational health and safety of workers, kuna institution moja tu ambayo ndio inahusika na masuala yote ya wafanyakazi Tanzania kwa ujumla, sio tu kwa upande wa extractive industries. Hiyo ni changamoto kubwa sana kwa sababu inakuwa uhitaji population ni kubwa sana ya wafanyakazi. Sasa swali ni kwamba wanawezaje kwa protect wafanyakazi wote Tanzania? Kwa hiyo kuna uhitaji wa kuweza kuangalia kipengele basi hata kuigawa sheria au kufanya some amendments within the law ili kuweza kutengwa maybe sekta fulani kuwe na sheria yake ambayo inaweza kuwa protect wafanyakazi yao, na sekta fulani iweze kuwa na sheria ambayo itaweza kuwa protect wafanyakazi wa aina hiyo. And implementation challenge nyingine ni masuala ya insufficient resources. From the law wanasema kwamba kuna uhitaji wa wafanyakazi kuweza kupimwa na madaktari ambao wanatoka OSHA. Lakini at the same time unakuta wafanyakazi wanapata madhara makubwa sana ambayo OSHA wenyewe wanakuwa wanashindwa kabisa kuweza kuwahudumia. Wanakuwa hawana madaktari wa kutosha ambao watakaoweza kuwatibu au kutoa ushauri kutokana na madhara hayo ambao wafanyakazi wamepata. Mwisho wa siku employer mwenyewe anakuwa anaingia gharama kubwa zaidi ya kwenda kumtoa mfanyakazi nje ya nchi, au mfanyakazi kupata tu madhara, kuishia tu nyumbani mpaka kifo pale kitakapoweza kumkuta. Another problem is that weak enforcement mechanism. Kuna kuwa na changamoto pia katika enforcement ya kuweza kulinda au kwenye upande wa occupational health and safety of workers within the extractive industries. Kwamba kuna uhitaji wa OSHA kuweza kila stage ambayo inafanyika kwa upande wa extraction of raw materials within the earth kuweza kupitia au kufanya hata zile training kwa wafanyakazi. Lakini changamoto hii pia inawakumba sana wa small scale miners. Yani ni wachimbaji wadogo, lakini process wanazotumia ni zile hazina tofauti sana na large scale miners au middle scale miners. Lakini tatizo ni kwamba hawako trained, they know nothing. Hata kufikiwa na OSHA pia inakuwa ni changamoto. Kwa hiyo inakuwa mwisho wa siku wanafanya tu kazi kiholela, na wala hawatumii, kwa asilimia kubwa hawatumii aina yote ile ya equipment ambazo zitaweza kuwa protect wao from any hazard substance ambazo zinaweza zika affect their health or their safety within the extractive industry. The other thing is recommendation ambazo nimeziona kwamba zitakuwa ni nzuri kama tukiweza kuzitumia is establishing comprehensive standards. Tukiweza kuwa na hizi standards zitaweza kutupatia sisi muongozo hata katika muda ambao tunaweza make the policies. Serikali ikiwa na make policies itaweza kutusaidia kuweza kutupatia muongozo hasa katika upande wa implementation au usimamizi wa kuweza kulinda haki za wafanyakazi ndani ya extractive industries. The other thing is enhancing monitoring mechanism, ambayo mfumo ambao unatumika pia unahitaji kuweza kufanywa marekebisho, maana mfumo ni ule unatumika katika sekta zote za wafanyakazi. Kama ni wa kilimo, kama ni extractive industries, kama ni normal industries, are the same thing, ambayo ni sio vyema kwa sababu aina ya kazi na mfumo wa kazi ambao wanafanya wafanyakazi tofauti kuna utofauti mkubwa sana. Yule anayefanya ndani extractive industry still the same na yule ambaye anafanya maybe katika kiwanda cha kutengeneza mchele au kiwanda cha kutengeneza vyakula. Okay. In conclusion, I might say that the past and present of occupational health and safety of workers in Tanzania extractive industries have undergone significant changes, but still the study shows that most Tanzanians working in extractive industries are not covered by the occupational health and safety law and do not access occupational health service effectively. Therefore, there is still a need for major modification to the existing legal provision to meet international requirements and standards. The future of occupational health and safety of workers in Tanzania extractive industries, it will look promising if the government will decide to take steps to improve the working condition of workers in the extractive industries. Thank you.
Asante sana Binadamu Mbwambo, mhazili msaidizi katika chuo cha Katoliki Mbeya, kwa wasilisho lako zuri la namna viwanda vya uziduaji vinavyofanya kazi, lakini pia umetuambia madhara yatokanayo na utendaji kazi wao na namna vinavyoathiri mazingira na pia vinavyoathiri wananchi na wafanyakazi. Lakini pia umezungumza juu ya mikataba mbalimbali ya kimataifa na sheria kama jitihada za kulinda haki za wafanyakazi katika viwanda vya uziduaji, umetuambia mafanikio na changamoto zake, utekelezwaji wake, na umetoa mapendekezo ya marekebisho ya sheria na pia kuwepo kwa sera za kusaidia kulinda wafanyakazi katika viwanda vya uziduaji. Tunakushukuru sana, na kama nilivyokwisha kusema, tutakuwa na mjadala baada ya mzungumzaji wetu wa mwisho. Hatutakuwa na wasilisho kutoka kwa mwadhiri kutoka Chuo Kikuu cha Dodoma ambaye angeweza kuzungumza juu ya dhana na utambuzi wa watu wa kiasili na athari katika haki zao za ardhi nchini. Na hivyo ninaomba nimlete ndugu Joseph Godfrey Senyenge ambaye ni mwanafunzi wa shahada ya kwanza katika Chuo cha Dodoma. Naye ataenda kutupa uchambuzi wa sera na sheria kuhusu ulinzi wa haki za wakimbizi nchini Tanzania. Karibu.
Esteemed guests, organizers, and my fellow attendees, greetings of the day. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers and for this opportunity of addressing you today. Esteemed guests, I am deeply grateful for the opportunity to share with you the title on the topic of analysis of the law, policy, and the practices on the protection of refugees' rights in Tanzania. With your kind attention, I hope to delve into the introduction, historical context, legal context, as well as examination of the discrepancy itself, and conclusion, as well as recommendations. Starting with an introduction. Universally, the refugees' problems has become a serious issue, has become an issue which requires a significant attention. As for now, various countries within the world are in conflict. For instance, we have witnessed the massive human displacement in human history, about nearly 7 million refugees, or 7 million people who fled from Israel-Palestinian war. Now, the term refugee is not a new terminology. Various scholars, various
But that notwithstanding, I think it is in order to recognize His Excellency, the former President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, who has occasioned this event to happen. Your Excellency, I salute you, as I do salute your wife, Madam Patience. Permit me also to recognize the former President of Sierra Leone, His Excellency Dr. Ernest Koroma, as I also appreciate the former Vice President of the Gambia and the Chair of the ECOWAS Commission, and of course, the Governor of Bayelsa under whose feet we are eating metaphorically. And of course, his wife and the governors from different states of Nigeria, the royal fathers, and as is wise in every occasion, and this is common, whenever men are in presence of their wife, they say, "My good wife," who is present in this assembly. I also want to appreciate a Nigerian friend who, while out of this country, said he must be here, and is here, Dr. Linus Okorie, who flew all the way from the United States of America to be with me here. We are gathered here to talk about democracy. I'm very slow to use that word in the recent past. Because who defines democracy? What is it? Is it about the periodic meetings or elections that we hold every so often? Is it equal to governance? Who defines democracy? Many years ago, a great African-American, John Henry Clark, who is a great Pan-Africanist, observing the many African countries that were regaining independence, said that when African countries regained independence, all of them inherited systems of government that were inherited from their former colonizers. And he went on to say, and none of them will ever succeed on the basis of those inherited governance systems. There is a sense in which those words now ring true. We are in a continent that is today divided into 54 countries out of a scheme which was hatched by European powers in 1884 and 1885 when they sat in Berlin to divide the continent of Africa into spheres of influence, into hunting grounds. The British had their hunting ground, the French did, the Belgians did, the Italians did, the Germans did, the Portuguese did. Then, of course, we resisted them, and they appeared to leave, and we celebrated. But the question is, did they leave? And if they leave, if they left the continent in which they lived and still are living, what impact did they have? Is the impact still with us? Have we liberated ourselves? And why did we drive them away? I can still remember those words that I listened to every so often, spoken on the 6th day of March, 1957 by Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. I can still remember him saying that we are regaining independence, that we may govern ourselves, that we may harness our resources, that we may have education that is in the best interest of our people, that we may take control of our cocoa and coffee and yams. The question this afternoon, have we? The question is, after all the countries regained independence, and we started electing our leaders, did they change? Did they husband our resources in a better way? I can still remember in 1958 when the same Kwame Nkrumah invites leaders in Accra, Ghana in 1958 and tells them that we are not truly free. There is another project that has inherited colonialism. It is neo-colonialism. And I can remember him moving 2 years later in Casablanca, Morocco, and telling his audience, this independence that we think we have regained, we will lose it. We will lose it because the neo-colonizer has not left. He is with us, and he is using some of us, and he is the enemy from within that we must be wary of. And he did not stop there. 3 years later, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, 32 African countries are now independent. Each one of them, heads of states, talking about Africa, about African unity, about the need to have one army, about the need to have one government, about the need to have one currency, about the need to have a common unified foreign policy. But they listened to him not. And we had a weak organization called the OAU, which made its contribution, participated in the liberation of other African countries. But the question is Africa the richer because we regained independence? You will remember that even as we regained independence, the other countries still remained here. And it's only in the 1980s that we see other African countries regaining their independence. You'll remember the wars of independence in Angola. You'll remember the wars of independence in Mozambique. You'll remember the wars of independence in Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde. And you'll remember the last bastion of man's inhumanity to man in South Africa in 1984, preceded only by liberation from the regime in what is now Zimbabwe. The question is, the promises that our founding fathers made to us, have we fulfilled them as we talk about democracy and constitutions? Who brought the constitutions to us? Which constitutions do our traditional rulers operate from? Are they written? For whose interests are they written? As I talk about democracy and development now, I want you to cast your eyes across the continent of Africa now. Look at young people dying as they leave the coast of Senegal. When you tell them about democracy and elections, are you talking to them when they are dying? When they are dying in the Mediterranean, are you talking to them? If you go into a room where there are 10 young Africans, 8 of them want to run away from the continent of Africa, even in countries where there are so-called constitutional governments. This is the Africa that we are talking about today. When you go to Australia, Europe, and America, young Africans are being humiliated. If you doubted it, you only saw what happened in Ukraine when the war broke out. See how Africans were being humiliated. The question that we are asking today, and the question that is alive and well today, and the debate that we ought to wrap our minds around today is, what is democracy? Whose democracy? Is there a possibility that we who are gathered here today as Carter G. Woodson said in 1933, we are so thoroughly miseducated that in fact, even when we think we are getting it right, we are getting it wrong. Is it a possibility that one of the things that we must do in assemblies such as this and at all times is to unlearn some of the indoctrination to which we have been subjected so that we may learn things that can help the continent of Africa? How is it that every time we think that we have diagnosed the disease properly and that we have a new antidote, when we apply that antidote, a new wound appears? How is it? How is it that when we regained independence in 1960, it started with coup d'etats, and as we speak now, we have coup d'etats? If our memories are not serving us well, don't you remember that no sooner had Congo regained independence in 1961 than there was a coup d'etat and Patrice Emery Lumumba was killed? If you doubt me, is it not the case that in 1963 in Togo they killed Sylvanus Olympia? If you doubt me, is it not the truth that in 1966 they overthrew Kwame Nkrumah? Is it not the truth that in this country they took away the government of Nnamdi Azikiwe and Abubakar Tafawa Balewa in 1967? Is it not true that they eliminated Modibo Keita in Mali? That they took away Ahmed Ben Bella in Algeria? So our story is, as the French would say, plus ça change, plus c'est la même change. The more things change, the more they remain the same. And if that is the case, we must ask ourselves uncomfortable questions, which will give us uncomfortable answers. Many times we don't want to ask those uncomfortable questions because we know the answers and we do not want to hear the answers. And we are assembled here to remind ourselves that the reason why we lament about Africa is that it appears that the systems of governance that we inherited and that we have been deploying for our benefit continue to put us at the foot of the ladder. We do not complain because there have been no changes and improvement in our circumstances. In certain cases, there have been. But as Uganda's Yoweri Museveni says, and I agree with him, what is the point of fighting as to who is taller than the other when you are all dwarfs? This is the space in which Africa finds herself. So that the state of California in the United States of America has a GDP bigger than all the countries of Africa combined. This is undesirable. It is undesirable that a country which is great in prospect, for example, like Nigeria, with a population of 250 million, generates less power than Costa Rica, which has a population of 5 million and generates 3 times more power than Nigeria. It's undesirable. This is what we are talking about. We are talking about countries which have GDPs, which ought not to be the GDP that they have. And we are saying that this must be because of the systems of governance that we have. I heard His Royal Majesty so very keenly, and I agree with him. What must we do? What is the nexus between good governance and development? And what is development? I remember Julius Kambarage Nyerere saying in 1966 that when they come and tell us that development are roads and airports, we agree with them. But that is not the end of development. The beginning and the end of development is human resources, Mwalimu said. Mwalimu said, and I agree with him, you can build roads and destroy roads. You can build airports and rebuild airports. But when you build human beings intergenerationally, the airports that you destroy come out of their minds. So we must also redefine what development is. We have seen countries where edifices were christened to constitute development, and they were destroyed in the twinkling of an eye. But the human spirit is resilient and is constantly seeking liberation. The human spirit is constantly yearning for something to fulfill it. And that something is what sometimes we refer to as the social contract. That no man or no group of men who have arrogated to themselves the monopoly of knowledge and wisdom must never ever assume that they are God's gift to man, to govern and rule them as they will. That is the duty of men willingly to surrender their will to men that they may govern them. So the next thing that we must interrogate in Africa is who is the leader? Because we have too many individuals in Africa occupying offices who are not leaders, they are merely misleaders. And the time is now, therefore, to ask ourselves, and I can still remember your now immortal words, Honorable and Excellency President, in 2015, when you said so very ably that your ambition was not worth the blood of the people of Nigeria. When you spoke those words, I do not know what came to your mind, but you must have received a sudden enlightenment, because those words underlined the fact that men must know when to stop. And the appropriate time, you stopped. And Nigeria was the richer because you stopped. We live in a continent today where every election is a harbinger for chaos. But you said, let it go. We have a saying in Kiswahili, asiyetaka kushindwa si mshindani. He who does not want to be defeated is not a contestant. Today, when we talk about leadership, we are talking about people to recognize that it's not a cutthroat competition. Unfortunately, in Africa, leadership and the quest for it is a cutthroat competition where throats are actually cut. So we must also, in addition to define democracy and governance and leadership, ask ourselves, who is a leader? You know, many years ago as a young man, I watched a movie, which movie has stuck in my mind. It was in 1982. And I went to the theaters and I went with a notebook. And the movie was Gandhi by Sir Richard Attenborough. And at that time, Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, had been invited back from South Africa by one of the great Indian nationalists, Professor Gokhale. And when he was invited to speak, this is what he said: I have nothing to say, but today as I see you here, the people who are assembled here are businessmen and lawyers from Delhi. You are pretending to speak to India and for India. This is not India. India is out there in the villages, in the hamlets. This is not Nigeria. Nigeria is out there in the municipalities. This is not Africa. Africa is out there in Bangui, in Nouakchott, in Khartoum where they are fighting, in Hirda. Africa is out there in Niamey. Africa is out there in Ouagadougou. Africa is out there in Bamako, in the slums of Bamako. When we speak here in English, do we reach them? When we speak in French, do we reach them? When we speak in Portuguese, do we reach them? What is the Yoruba word for democracy? What is the Ijo word for democracy? What is the Ibibio word for democracy? What is the Igbo word for democracy? Give me that word. When you give me that word, then we are beginning a conversation. Because that conversation is the conversation that is going to tell us how we have a symbiotic relationship between democracy and the thing that we call development. You know, this mother continent, this continent that remains in the stage in which it remains, is a continent that continues to suffer even because of external factors. But we have blamed the others for too long. We must begin to blame ourselves. Oh, we have blamed the British and they deserve to be blamed. When we belong to the Commonwealth and we call our ambassadors high commissioners, we deserve to blame them because our political true north appears to be the United Kingdom. That's where when we have our presidents and they want to contest elections in Africa, they go to Chatham so that their masters can listen to them and say, it's okay. So we can blame the British and they deserve to be blamed. We deserve to blame the French because before you are elected into one of their countries, you've got to go to Paris and they've got to say, c'est la vie. Then they say, très bien. And then we know that you come back home and you are simply a manager of a plantation. And if you had any doubt about that, just see what is happening in Niger when the French president says, I will not remove my ambassador. And Africa says nothing about it. And even when they say anything about it, they say it mutedly and they sanitize their language lest they annoy Paris. And the same happens in Portugal. The same happens with the Belgians. I look forward to an Africa where things are done in the continent of Africa. And this continent of Africa has tried, and there is no shortage of individuals who have tried to link democracy and development. In our midst, we have leaders. We have the two former presidents here who served well. I've said this before. No matter how good a dancer you are, you must know when to leave the stage. There are too many dancers in Africa who think I'm the only dancer in town. And until God calls me, I'm not leaving the stage. Such dancers will be removed by men. And that is how I explained the coup d'etats that are coming here. In 1964, talking about the military interventions in civilian government, this is what Kwame Nkrumah said. The military have no business interfering with civilian governments. But if civilian governments misbehave, it may become necessary for a short period to disrupt their agenda so that they can midwife a new dispensation. It is in this context that we must understand the military interventions. But remember that true democracy requires and demands the eternal vigilance of the people. Because Africa has also seen a situation where military leaders remove their uniform and adorn suits, and lo and behold, like Paul and Saul, they become civilians themselves. And therefore, it is important, even as we celebrate these military coups, to remind ourselves that they are merely midwives. And midwives are neither the father, nor the mother, nor the child. Their duty is to ensure that all the three are happy. And we, the population, must be eternally vigilant. And that is why, therefore, when we talk about democracy, we must ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong? And we must also ask the question, are coup d'etats only mounted by men and women in uniform? No. I've seen coups mounted by judiciaries in Africa. I've seen coups being mounted by the political class in Africa. When people engage in sophistry in interpreting constitution, those are also coup d'etats. And I would want us, therefore, as we talk about strengthening democracy, we must also talk about strengthening institutions. Whether it is in Kenya, whether it is in Zimbabwe, whether it is in Nigeria, whether it is in Ghana, we must have a culture of respecting institutions. Sometimes in Africa, we behave as if institutions work on their own motion. No. Institutions are as strong as the men and women who occupy them. If you have wrong men and wrong women in office, no matter how strong the institution you claim to be strong, it will not perform, because the history of nature is one: garbage in, garbage out. And if that is the case, therefore, we who are gathered here and talking about governance, this is serious business. What we are talking about here is serious business. I want you to look at Africa now with me. In Sudan, in Khartoum, because of bad governance and absence of democracy, no schooling going on in Khartoum. If you are a university professor, no university to lecture at. There is no agriculture going on there. There are no health services going on there in Khartoum. The things that they built, they are destroying. It will take generations to rebuild Sudan. We are talking about development. In the health sector, all the children that ought to have been vaccinated will not be vaccinated, which means that all the disease that we had conquered will come back again, so that the health burden will be that heavy. No food is being planted, so that we'll once again be importing rice and wheat from Ukraine, which is at war. Look at the Sahel now. Mali is de facto divided into two, no agriculture going on. So that you will be importing chicken from Brazil, chicken. No agriculture. I'm talking about development, brothers and sisters. If we are sick because there is no research going on in our universities, no research. We receive medicine from India, from China, and we take the medicine by faith because we do not know what they contain. Our bureaus of standardization have no standards for these things. And if you doubt me, only recently we had syrup imported from India. How many children did it kill in the Gambia? We have no standardization. So we are talking about serious business in Africa. Go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the eastern part of it, over 120 armed groups. The busiest airspace in the continent of Africa. The rest of the world is taking our resources. There is a new scramble for Africa. Today, Africa is a theater for other worlds. If the British have gone and they have not gone, if the French have gone and they have not gone, if the Portuguese have gone and they have not gone, if the Belgians have gone and they have not gone, Chinese are also here. They are here. Building roads, building stadia. The Turks are here. The Qataris are here. The Russians are here. And yet Africans somehow believe that when we remove one slave master and we bring another slave master, then it's better. So we hear Africans praising Wagner in Russia. African intellectuals. I think the president of ECOWAS called them pseudo-intellectuals. An appropriate and heavy English word. The question, therefore, is what must we do? Because there is a neo-colonial project and there is a new scramble for Africa. And Africa is moving from pillar to post, passing declaration after declaration. Africans are good at passing declarations. The Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. To develop Africa, did we fulfill it? No. The Yamoussoukro Declaration on Free Airspace 1988, have we fulfilled it? No. The Abuja Declaration of 2001 to spend at least 15% of our budget in health, did we fulfill it? No. The Malabo Declaration against terrorism and unconstitutional changes of government, have we fulfilled it? It is as if it was steroids to tell others now that they don't want it, let's have it. Malabo. The Maputo Declaration on the rights of women and all these, have we fulfilled them? The time is now that Africa should stop attending meetings. We should only have periodic meetings to ask ourselves, how effectively have we implemented the declaration that we made? Because we are talking about governance. Otherwise, Africa is being tossed from pillar to post. I'm still talking about democracy and development. And you know, Africa is tossed like yo-yo. Their leaders are invited to the G7. Once the photo is taken, then they go. Recently, we were invited to something called the G20. And then we celebrated, then we go. Then we are invited to the BRICS. Then we celebrate, then we go. Then we'll be invited to the G77, then we go. We are in the business of being invited to meetings. Ladies and gentlemen, one can go on, but I want to pose a number of questions as I bring my submission to the close. This continent of Africa, this continent that is divided into 54 countries, is it not the time now that we must examine what constitutes democracy? Is there something in our traditional governance systems that we can take and help how we govern? Is there something like that? This is a question that I want us to consider. Is there a possibility that the elections we hold, that we do not understand, are the actual disruptors of our democracy in Africa? That we spend so much time in them, and that the only thing that lacks in African government is actually trust? Do we trust each other in Africa? I want to pose, Where does Nigeria print her ballots? Is it in Nigeria? The answer is no. Does Kenya print her ballots in Kenya? No. Does Zimbabwe print her ballots in Zimbabwe? No. This is part of the problem. Trust. The third thing that we asked ourselves, do we prepare our leaders or young people to take over leadership in an environment that is understood by the population, or we think that leadership is something that is God-given to us and must never surrender? The question is, can we learn from others? Can we learn from others and implement creatively? The fourth thing that we must ask ourselves, what can we do to create an environment where our resources are deployed in a manner that is understood by the society? These are the questions that I think ought to be alive in our minds. And I want to conclude with this. In 1997, the 6th day of March, the president of Tanzania, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere, was invited as a guest of honor on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Ghana's independence, and this is what he said. He said, several years ago, Kwame Nkrumah knew that if we are united, then the world will begin to respect us. Because the world does not recognize our Tanzanianness or Ghanaianness, you, ladies and gentlemen, that we give meaning to those words of Kambarage Nyerere. He went on, that our generation had a divine duty to liberate the continent of Africa from the yoke of colonialism. In the process of doing so, we made many mistakes, but who among us is without error? You, the generation that now exists today, it is your duty to lift Africa from another pedestal. And you can only lift the continent by doing certain things that are required of you. It will be tiring. It will be painful. But of all the sins that we have committed, there is one mistake that we must never commit: the mistake of giving up. I'm urging you today, we must never give up. And I see Africa today, we have tried many things: Africa Agenda 2063, Africa Continental Free Trade Area. All these are efforts that are being made, and they can only happen in an environment where there is peace and tranquility. We promised ourselves that we would silence the guns in the year 2020. The guns are louder now. So as we are committing ourselves to this reality, that the continent of Africa has the ability, we have the human resource, which is the greatest of all resources. We have the natural resource. This continent, which is great in prospect, will not realize our potential. The time is now. The time, therefore, is now. You leaders who are here, when you are seeking office, seek office that you may be servant leaders. The time is now. Those young men who are here, who allow themselves to be used as cannon fodder by individuals who seek public office on the basis of ill-gotten wealth, the time is now to reject their money. The time is now for Africans, wherever they are, to remember that development will never come unless we have good governance. The time is now that African institutions must not receive instructions from institutions outside of the continent. The time is now that we Africans must exercise the ghost of low self-esteem. The time is now that we Africans must not think that we are only good when we receive a seal of approval from heads of states of other countries. The time is now for Nigeria particularly to rise to the occasion. 1 in every 5 black men in the world is Nigeria. Don't let us down. Rise up and lead the continent. God bless you.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Professor Patrick Lumumba. He was billed to speak for 30 minutes.
When I'm saying the prof is an asset, so I can now say in Kiswahili, we say, wewe ni mali ya bara la Afrika. I see he's very happy. I'm going to ask Dr. Chikwatamba, who will come and introduce our guest speaker for us. And the prof will be here for us to listen.
Well, good evening. There may be many protocols that must be noted and observed in this memorial lecture, and all of them are observed accordingly. My task is easy. I'm here to introduce him. Him who has been mentioned by the various speakers as they were conversing with you. Many people are aware of the fact that Professor Lumumba is here in our midst, and not any other Professor Lumumba, but Professor PLO. But many people are not aware of the fact that Professor Lumumba is an associate professor of public law. If I was supposed to ask, many of you will not know. It is good you are here. You will also know that he's the holder of an LLD Doctor of Laws on the law of the sea from the University of Ghent, Belgium, and the fact that he has got Master of Laws degree and Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Nairobi. It is good you came because you'll be able to know for the first time tonight that he also holds an honorary degree of the Doctor of Letters from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. He is quite very well trained, specifically on human rights, at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, University of London in England. Quite much more of a humanitarian law at the Royal Wallenberg Institute of the University of Lund in Sweden, and on international human law in Geneva, Switzerland. He's an advocate of the High Courts of Kenya and Tanganyika and a certified mediator. When he comes here, you look at the body structure of this person, you won't believe what is written about him. He's a fellow of the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya, a fellow of the Kenya Institute of Management, and an honorary fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. He's the chairperson of Farafina Investment Group in Monvorio. I want to emphasize that I said Farafina, not Sarafina. I know. He's the immediate former director and chief executive officer of the Kenya School of Law, among other achievements that he has acquired in life. Without reading every aspect about him, some of the things when he's speaking, you'll be able to see that there is much that is not announced about him, particularly because academically and scholarly, he has written several books, including Criminal Procedure in Kenya, among others, which I'm not mentioning. He has published numerous articles and several book chapters. You may want to know of the fact that he has co-authored 13 other books on integrity, on school series, and he has recently ventured into fiction with his book that he wrote that is called Stolen Moments. how he writes his books is how Ray Phiri used to compose his songs. He has been named and recognized by the International Commission of Jurists and the Law Society of Kenya for the exemplary contribution to the legal profession. When I say legal profession, I just wanted to connect with him that when he comes and speak here, he might also want to know that recently the university had hosted the South African chapter of the International Association of Human Judges. It's not about that, but, Professor, I might just pass this over to you, particularly because of your law legal issues that I'm reading about here. He was recognized by the Kenya USA Association for the Martin Luther King Jr. Leadership Award in 1996. But look at the man when he comes, you won't believe. And was the recipient of the 2008 Martin Luther King Africa Salute of Greatness Award by the Martin Luther King Jr. Africa Foundation. He has also been included on Who is Who in the World and is the distinguished Julius Nyerere Lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam for 2014. He was the 11th Kwame Nkrumah Lecturer at the University of Cape Town of Cape Coast in Ghana in 2016. When I say Cape Town, I wanted you to listen to me, Cape Coast. On the 27th of May 2017, he was invested Chief Tamba Taylor of Liberia for his Pan-Africanist activities. He was